what I initially thought was like, this is happening to me because I did something wrong. And what the real mindset needed to be is this is happening for me so I can free myself from me and go do something that creates epic change. Welcome to Hello, Kind Soul. I am your host, Dr. Ebony Green. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Our podcast, the importance is to lift your spirit one episode at a time. So today we're going to really spend some time thinking about a quote that says, what I thought was retribution was salvation, right? And when I think of that quote, there's so much to it. But I'm going to think the best place to start would be with a story, right? And so last week, I talked a little bit about when you get an opportunity to take another job on, to do something epic or something you think would be epic, you go down that road, right? And so when you get there, there's all these expectations, right? There's these feels, there's these thoughts about what is it going to mean for me? What is it going to mean for them? How am I going to create change? I can't wait to look for the outcomes and the outputs and all of the success, right? And I remember getting that opportunity. And I was super excited because my whole career has been about how do I create change for young people? What does that look like and feel like? And so I took this job and I was super excited, right? And I get into it and I'm all ready to go. And as I'm in the job, I'm realizing like, this doesn't feel good. Or what I initially thought, the opportunities I thought I would have, I didn't really have, right? And maybe I was ill-prepared to take the position. Maybe the position was ill-prepared for me to show up in it. Maybe I didn't define in my head exactly how long change would take from that realm. But I remember being there and sitting with that and feeling this sense of discomfort and feeling a sense of frustration. And I would go to work every day. And when I would get to work, I would sit and say, like, what is the change? What's the tangible outcome need to look like for you to feel like you're really making a difference? And I couldn't get to that place. And so over the time that I was there, I started to think about, like, if this is not what you're here to do because you don't have the opportunity to, then leave and go do something else. I will tell you that I would never leave a position or a title that I felt a sense of efficacy. Most of us don't, right? When it's okay or it's, kind of good, we sit in that place. Some of us thrive there for forever. Some of us are there and we think that it's not everything we need, but we're like, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. And then there's some of us that decide that complacency is fine. I'm doing kind of okay. I'm giving just enough, right? That's not the place I've ever sat. For me, if I cannot see the change in real time, I start to attach that to, like, is this worth it? And are you really doing anything that makes a difference? And so it got to the place where I was like, okay, I made up in my mind, like, it's time to go. And it's time to go for multiple reasons. But most importantly, it's time to go because I know in the quiet of the night, there's an inventory I go through. What did you do today? What's been the impact? How have you changed lives? How have you changed personally? How have you changed the people around you, right? And when I would think about those things in the evening, no box was checked. It was like I showed up and I did my best, and I think I did some things, but there's no real evidence that it actually creates any change. And in that moment, I feel like I was being punished because I wasn't doing any of the things I thought I was going to do. And when that happens, there are many, many times where you'll start to, like, internalize it, like it's my fault, right? Or am I not working hard enough? But then there are also moments where we get to where we realize that sometimes we are ill-placed. And sometimes we're placed right in the perfect spot. And for this particular role at that particular time, I was placed perfectly to the extent that I was being pushed to leave, right? There was this agitation that made me feel like I had to go. This was no longer the spot where I'm going to sit because I'm not creating the change I want to create. And that agitation built to this place of disconnection. And I finally made a decision. It's time to go. It's time to go because at the end of the day, to sit in a place, regardless of title or money or esteem or clout or power or whatever it is, people stay rooted in things that don't serve them well, use to justify their existence. Yeah, for me, I had to go. But what I will say is in that experience, in that moment, in that reflection, it makes me realize that what I thought was retribution was salvation. Because when I was there, I feel like I got there and then I was being punished for moving to that place, right? And it was like, what did I do wrong? And I did nothing wrong. I did everything right. And here's why I say that. Because when you think about this idea of retribution, and I say, well, it wasn't actually retribution, right? I wasn't being punished. I was being saved, right? It was salvation. It's specifically because if I had not been agitated, if I had not been aware enough to say, this doesn't feel good, this doesn't align with where I want to go, this doesn't align with what I want to do, this doesn't even align with my core values, because ultimately I'm a face of something that I think deeply does not actually shift the system in a way that serves students best. And that's my own personal opinion, right? There are people who will be involved in that situation that would tell me I was completely wrong. And maybe I am, because guess what? I make a million mistakes too. But what I know is that that particular placement was actually agitating me on purpose. Like I was meant to go there. I was meant to be uncomfortable. I was meant to be in a state of discontent. I was meant to become undone. Because without that piece on my journey, I would have stayed somewhere and not gone to the next level, right? Which is what brought me here. And so as I looked back and I got further and further away from that situation, and so obviously I left because I'm sitting here now, but so I did leave, and that was probably 7, 8 years ago at this point. What I will say is that because I left, I was then put into multiple situations, which now I can see as I look back and review that absolutely served me well. And when I say this term of salvation, right? Like I was saved from a placement that was never meant to be a destination, or at least not a final one. Indeed, it might have been a season. And that season was meant to agitate me towards thinking about what do I need to do next so that I can feel a sense of efficacy. Because showing up to a place and not doing the things that I think should be done in the ways that I think they should be done was problematic to me. And so that piece saved me from a season of discontent. It saved me from a season of wasting time, right? Of deciding that I was just going to sit around and wait for these things to happen. But what I will tell you, there's so many emotions wrapped up in this feeling, right? When we think about this notion of retribution, it's like I'm getting paid back for something I did, right? I'm being punished for something I said or I did. And while that feels that way, right? Because there are a bunch of promises that tend to be told to people when they take different positions or roles, right? They say, take this role, or apply for this role. We think you'll be a good fit. We think you'll do all these things. And so in your head, you start to think about it and you make yourself promises like it's going to be this and it's going to be that. And we idealize what this utopic place could be. But let me be very clear. The dream is not always aligned to the reality. Right? Now, the goal is to figure out how to align them. But most often, what people tell you something will be is very rarely how you experience it, because we're individuals. And while someone can offer you something, an opportunity, whatever it is, and it could feel good, the truth of the matter is that I will interpret it as I choose because I'm my own individual. And so as I thought and I looked back and I was thinking about what did that feel like, there was a whole bunch of emotions that kind of went through my mind, my body, and my spirit, right? So the first emotion was like frustration. Like, why did I even waste my time doing this thing? Why did I even waste my time coming to take this job? Like, I almost felt like I jumped so fast because I was so excited to continue to make change in a particular way that I didn't really think about long term what were the positives and maybe what was the negatives, right? And so there was a frustration because I feel like I had been duped. Like I thought I was going to be able to do these things that I don't think I can do. And it was like fresh and it was like raw and I was like aggravated. And then there was this another emotion that kind of creeped up, and it was like being upset with yourself because you didn't do your due diligence, right? And so there was great disappointment because at the end of the day, let's be really clear, folks, when you spend your time in education, unequivocally, every day we go to work and get it wrong, someone's dying because of us. So when we think about this notion of education and the amount of esteem we give to, let's say, doctors who work on one life at a time, we often neglect to give educators their due applause, right? Because they're working on 30 lives at a time, 300 lives at a time. And so I'm aware that when I take a position, any position, that I have to stand 10 toes down in that position. And so there was a deep disappointment that I felt because I now had gotten to a place where I felt like I was no longer impacting the world in the ways that make me excited and allowed me to lean into things that I knew would actually create great change. And so to go home and to sleep with yourself, right, in the quiet of the night and think about like, what did I do today and have no real answer is problematic, especially for me. And so when you're like figuring out, well, what is this feel like for you? It's that deep disappointment. Like, I'm not doing anything. Like I'm writing this and I'm writing that and I'm creating plans, but what do those plans do? How do we enact them? How do we implement them? And how does that connect to student achievement and outcomes? And when I can't start to answer those questions in real time, it becomes problematic, right? And then I got angry. And I got angry because I thought about, I was that student who came from meager beginnings, right? I was that student whose mom worked really hard, and I had two parents, and one passed away when I was 7, and then my mom took the reins and ran down the lane as far as she could. But I did not have a lot, and so the education system shaped me, right? And so even though my mom was a single mom, she worked her butt off, and I went to private schools, and so I got a different experience. But it made me angry because I knew that not every kid in this world gets that different experience, and so it was my responsibility to ensure that no matter what space I'm in, I am showing up, and what I'm doing connects to making sure that these young people have an opportunity to thrive no matter where they go. Right? That they are allowed to reach their fullest potential, and that they get to paint on that canvas about in terms of what it needs to look like. Right? And so that anger to me was like, it wasn't just about the one system I was in. It was a real recognition of all the systems we're in. Right? Like, how many systems do we have roles and titles that we create for people that essentially have no power attached to it, and then you can't actually effectuate change, and then you blame yourself, or you leave that system and go to another system that does the identical same thing. It's like the definition of insanity, except there are actual human beings at stake when we get it wrong. And then I felt this need to say, I am going to color outside the lines. I'm going to break the rules, right? And I say that because one of the things, fun fact about me is that I had 20 years in a system. So I could technically leave in 5, even though I don't have the age because I'm way younger than I look. But the point being that I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to go color outside the lines, and I think I'm just going to go quit and figure it out. And that sounded nuts to so many people, right? Because we are taught and we are conditioned to be a certain way, to believe a certain thing, to stay focused in a certain box, to not agitate the system. And so within that box, it's like you do your 25, you do your 30, you clock out, and then you go live. And the way that I saw it was if you're living in a place of extreme stress, right? Particularly toxic stress with young people, that essentially this promise of retirement does or does not exist, depending on who you are, right? And I'm sure all of us can think about the folks that it did exist for and the folks it didn't exist for. And so for me, it was like, I'm going to go color outside the lines now while I'm excited and I'm passionate, and I know that there's so much more I could be doing that could be similar or different. But at least I'm going to create my own rules. At least I'm going to decide what next needs to look like, right? And so in there showed up this incredible empowerment. Like, wait, no one else has created this for you. The life you live, you have earned. You have studied. You've done all those things. And so you then have the permission to say, I'm going to bet on me. I'm going to leave, and I'm going to do something that I think that really matters. And when I say and I speak to this idea of like thinking about long term, like what does this have to look like for you? It's really thinking through like what is the emotions when we are disappointed, right? Because what we took on and we thought was going to be one thing becomes another, right? When I look back, that was absolutely salvation. And I'm sure all of us have experiences where, like, even if it's a breakup, like I broke up with this person and I thought they were the be all end all. The truth is, folks, there are seasons to every single thing we do, right? And sometimes that season is 30 years and sometimes that season is 3 days and sometimes that season is 30 seconds. But there are seasons, clearly. And so what we also have to recognize is that if we're not able to recognize that this is not good for me, or this isn't working, or whatever that is, sometimes it gets turned upside down and then you're like, what is happening? And we have to acknowledge that there's a season. Like there was a season of me working in the K-12 education system, and I loved every second of it, even that one that I talk about, because each and every moment taught me something very invaluable. But I want us to think about this perspective shift, because what I initially thought was like, this is happening to me because I did something wrong. And what the real mindset needed to be is this is happening for me so I can free myself from me and go do something that creates epic change. But I wouldn't have done it if I was in this place of comfort. I wouldn't have done it if I was in this place of complacency. I wouldn't have done it if it was good enough, right? And I share that story with you because I'm no braver than you. We all have brave moments, and I've learned to be braver in my existence. But truly, at that time, that person, that version of Ebony, listen, I was never a rebellious person to the extent of like, I'm going to go risk this and leave this job. Like that was not, I was raised, you get a job, you keep a job, you hold a job, you retire from a job. And that's what you do, which is what most of us were raised. But what I appreciated was thinking now, when I look back, like, wow, I'm glad that season happened because it forced me to really think about what am I here to do? And does this, what you're doing right now, look like that, sound like that, and feel like that? And if it doesn't, it could be your version of agitation, right? It could be the thing you're looking at that's saying retribution, like I'm being punished. And the true matter is God, spirit, source, whatever you believe in is creating these conditions to make you wildly uncomfortable, folks, wildly uncomfortable. So that you will move to this place of, oh no, this isn't, let me try this, right? And so the other emotion I felt like once I made the decision, there was like this relief of pressure. Like, oh gosh, thank you. Because there are moments, like how many of you out there are moments, situations, experiences, careers that you're in that you know are not it. And you could just feel it in your spirit, even if you can't name it. Because sometimes, we struggle with to put to words what it is we're feeling. We just know it's like, ugh, this isn't it. But because we're there already, we struggle to like say it out loud. And so when I was able to like kind of figure out what I wanted to do, find a job that I felt would more appropriately allow me to use my skills and gifts to continue to impact the world and effectuate change, and I finally submitted the letter of resignation, it was like, oh man, this feels good. This feels right. And that's when you know it's like in alignment because it goes from like this to like now I'm in the right place. You can feel when the Lego pieces snap together and make a good fit. And that's like your affirmation, right? Like, okay, you're going to do this. And when I say, one of the things like bravery is a word I use a lot. Courage is another one. But when you color outside the lines in a society that's taught you to follow all the rules, even though they don't follow the rules, right? There's moments of you that squishes and you get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? It's the difference, the joke I always say, it's the difference between being a kid and being like, I'm going to go to Jamaica. And then you become an adult and you're like, I'm going to go to Jamaica, Queens, right? Completely different. Your dreams have gone from this big to this big, and now we've accepted it being this big. And all I'm saying to you is the moment that I realized that I was being saved from that moment, I went back to this big. Because what I could understand, the emotion that I was full of was like, dang, like you did this thing that you were told never to do. You did this thing that you knew didn't align to who you were, and you've decided to make a different choice. You are worried about what the outcome will be, but you're so faithful, stepping 10 toes down that you're not scared of what that's going to be. And so I'm telling you, folks, when you can't be faithful and fearful in the same time. Someone told me that recently, and I was so mad because I was, like this season of life has been tough, right? And the person I was on the phone with was like, Eb, you can't be fearful and faithful at the same time. It don't work. You got to pick one, right? And it really allowed me to think about, like, if I'm faithful, that I'm capable, that I know no matter what, I have the ability to go, man, because the 90% of the time we don't recognize where we are and make the other decision is because we don't feel that we actually have the capabilities to do the thing we dream about. And so being able to walk out first and show folks, like, I don't care what you've been told. I didn't even care what I was been told. In that moment when I left, it wasn't about like, there was no rational, all these things I'm sharing to you is in reflection, right? In the moment, I was like, I just need to go do this thing. And that's probably when I was been my most faithful. Because the one thing I did know is like, there's a lot of things wrong with me and I mess up a lot of stuff, but my career, the level of effort and energy I give to my work, to my students, to my staff, that is unmatched. And so that was the only piece of me that I knew I could own. If I can do it here, I can do it anywhere. And then I left. That's when I had those emotions show up. And then now when I look back, I can really think through and sift through to say, okay, here are all the things I felt, right? And then the last thing I felt was pride. because at the time, I had 2 younger kids who were watching, right? Because kids will listen to what you say and then they watch what you do. And then the second piece is that there's a whole bunch of folks that I know who feel similar feelings and was just like, oh no, that's not something we can do. And so for me, it was pride to say like, listen, sis, I did it, you could do it too. Listen, bruh, I did it, you could do it too. You just have to figure out what it's gonna look like for you, right? Like you can't drive in my lane because my lane's my lane, but what does it look like in your lane? Right? It offers up this example and opportunity for other people to look at it, right? And so here's what I want you to really think about and what I want to leave you with. It's like, bruh, you got to see it as a win. Like it's a win. What the many experiences that you've had that something has happened that has been taken from you, or if you've lost or you've walked away, I want you to look back at those experiences and think about, to what extent was this a win? I can honor the season and say, I am grateful for that job that I had. I am grateful for the opportunity to even interview, right? And to get the opportunity. But I can also recognize that as a result of that opportunity, I have been transformed forever, because it was the first time I was able to recognize my discontent and then make an informed decision that says, I don't have to live in this space and I can move forward. And in the rear view, I can now see the win. Because if I hadn't allowed the agitation to awaken something in me, I would have stayed and I would have never gotten here. And so that situation was a win because it was actually saving me from being in a place that ultimately would have continued to make me very unhappy. And then, like, hurt people. So if I was unhappy, I can't imagine how long it would take for me to start to be miserable, right? And petty patty and bitter Bruce. Like when you're in a place where you're not happy, then that yucky person comes out. So, you have to take the time, folks, to look at the examples behind you and claim it as a win. Like all of these things that you've experienced in your life or have been through have been opportunities for you. The question is, how do you look at them? Right? Can we move away from this space of ego? Like that was the job and I should have did this and why didn't they do that? And I don't like them. Like none of my commentary was about how they interacted with me. What I've just done is really shared with you how I interacted with me with regard to a situation that didn't make me happy, right? I can own the things I did well. I can say I may not have known all the things I needed to do. I may not have had the wisdom to really appreciate the opportunity, whatever it is. But for sure, looking outside of me to figure out what made me personally unhappy is fruitless, right? And so I see it as a win and I can claim it as a win and I can understand how I'm blessed as a result of that circumstance and situation. And so what I want to leave you with is a couple questions, right? What are the moments in your life that you thought were retribution, but were actually salvation? Are you able to look back at them and really kind of decipher and take them apart and think about, this I didn't like, and so I did this, or this I didn't like, but I still stayed, whatever it is, right? Can you see the opportunity of reflection and how that can translate into you winning in that season? How that particular thing, one great example is the amount of people I speak to who said I was laid off or I was fired. And those people are now balling, doing so much better in places where they're thriving, right? And in some regard, making a ton of money, right? Creating a bunch of impact. But had they not been fired or laid off, they would not have even had that opportunity. So while they thought it was retribution, it was absolutely salvation because they were here to do something very different. And so I want you to spend time thinking about these, whether it's relationships, whether it's schooling, whether it's career, whatever it is. I think there is something to be said about us valuing who we are, being able to tell the truth of the story, but more importantly, understanding that every single situation we go through, while complex, is meant to teach us something. It's meant to build something within us. It's meant to create a specific emotion or many emotions that we then can sift through and process to make us better. So with that being said, I hope you have an amazing week, kind soul, and I hope you take some time to unpack the phrase. What I thought was retribution was salvation. Until next week, have an amazing week, be safe, and make sure that you continue to align your words to action. Like, subscribe, and share this as many times as you can for whomever you think it would be helpful for them to hear. Please follow me, eGreen Equity, on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Talk to you next week.